I think this will be the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do about the problems of the West. I know that there are places that are already in a state of discordia that once were places where people could be somewhat safe and prosperous, and that through bad decisions on the part of the public that have allowed corrupt elements to take over the levers of power in society, they have kind of devolved into the Hobbesian state. There are places like this, we can point to them. But for those places that are still somewhat safe and functional, the trajectory of things has gotten so troubling on so many fronts that it's difficult to get one's head around the entirety of it and the causes of it. And it's like half the people can't even see the pattern to vote in a way that would preempt the problems. So, to this end, I suppose the best approach for this series would be to examine the day-to-day concerns of the average functional member of society and trace them back to their source to see what could address them, what could make them better by pointing out what makes them worse. So, starting with the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's the need for physical safety. The average person in one of these declining societies in the West has to pay attention to their physical safety constantly because our system, at least in some places, seems not up to the task of removing dangerous people from the general population. Like, I know there's sort of varying degrees of this. Like, where I live in America, it seems like it's real spotty. Like, personal safety, some places are safer than others, different times and places. Like, law enforcement will act against violent offenders, but there's still a lot of victim making going on. Whenever you see a victim, someone who was a contributing member of society whose life is destroyed on one or more levels by criminals or a criminal, you'll find that those criminals have had prior interactions with law enforcement and the criminal justice system, but it has failed to either rehabilitate them or separate them from the public in a way that prevents them from creating more victims. This could be extended beyond physical safety to also the safety of one's property and finances, as the same could be said of property crimes and financial crimes. The system doesn't do an adequate job of protecting the public from harmful people on multiple levels. So it's like we don't even have this base need of physical safety. And yet our governments seem to ever expand the laws on the books, like the number of laws on the books, and also the means to surveil us to some end. But it seems to never enhance the personal safety of anybody. It seems more to protect their power than to protect the public. They do this, it's through the proliferation of laws for victimless crimes. They turn the average person's life into a game of Simon Says, where the rules constantly change and the loser has their life destroyed while nobody is made to feel safer. And it's like this game applies to the rights defined in the US by the Bill of Rights. So in some countries, these rules are applied to speech. If you try to speak freely about your concerns over personal safety and the mechanism by which that safety is supposed to be protected, i.e. the police, those very police will be turned on you rather than violent criminals. It's like law enforcement has been instructed to abdicate its responsibility for public safety in favor of acting as a Praetorian guard for those who legislate against this basic right of free speech. And the same applies to the right to self-administer one's physical safety through bearing of arms. That has been totally stripped in some places, leaving everyone to rely on brute force or improvised weapons. It's a situation where, through an abundance of lawmaking, the state of the public has been reduced to the Hobbesian, where the strong dominate the weak, the many dominate the few, and the young dominate the old, with not even the equalizer of firearms available by right to address the imbalance. Legislative energy is put into ever expanding the horizontal scope of laws, while insufficient executive energy is put into the vertical dimension of enforcing the laws that support public safety. It's all been turned towards like Praetorian ends. Instead, law enforcement is like water, taking the path of least resistance by enforcing laws against victimless crimes on nonviolent people, while violent criminals and various kinds of thieves in both the upper and lower strata of society are ignored, or partially ignored. Ignored enough to make the average person feel unsafe in their person and property. There is no social contract where rights are given up, but not even personal safety is provided in exchange. What are we getting? The answer is simple. In the case of personal safety, it's not difficult to see the pattern of victim making on the part of a dangerous person. Right from their youth, you can see the trajectory. The instances of true rehabilitation seem so rare as to be unworthy of any resources. Like, people can barely survive, much less, people like this who make victims, they have no real hope of becoming productive members of society, much less nonviolent ones. The remedy is for violent offenders to be separated from the public at the first sign of the pattern, for them to be warehoused until they are too old to dominate in a Hobbesian environment. People like this will never be able to function in a self-sufficient manner, let alone refrain from making victims of those who do. It's not fair for the public to be relegated to bearing the whole burden of self-defense, armed or otherwise, where they're stripped of that means by law, and constantly having to bear the burden of worry for their more vulnerable loved ones in a society where law enforcement is turned on the functional segments of it in the pursuit of malprohibited crimes, while playing nothing but cleanup crew to the crimes of the land sharks they otherwise ignore. It's easy enough to know who is dangerous, and so there's no reason besides the misappropriation of our laws and law enforcement resources why those with a pattern of violence shouldn't be warehoused until they're elderly. The solution is to warehouse the violent and do it with enthusiasm. That's all for now.